Greetings and welcome to the Stealth BioTherapeutics Fiscal Year 2019 Financial Results and Recent Business Highlights Call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. A question-and-answer session will follow the formal presentation. If anyone should require operator assistance during the conference, please press star 0 on your telephone keypad. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to your host, Mr. Henry Hess, Chief Legal Counsel for Stealth BioTherapeutics. Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning. I'd like to remind listeners that management will be making forward-looking statements on today's call, including, for example, expected timeline and plans for development of elamiprotide and other pipeline programs, expectations for discussions and possible opportunities with potential partners and collaborators, and discussions related to the company's financial position. Actual results may differ materially from those indicated by these forward-looking statements as a result of various important factors, including those discussed in the Risk Factors section of Stealth's Form 20-F filed with the SEC on April 4, 2019. While we may elect to update these forward-looking statements at some point in the future, we specifically disclaim any obligation to do so if our views change. Now, I'd like to turn over the call to Reenie McCarthy, Stealth CEO. Reenie?
Thank you, Henry, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this morning to review our full year financial results and recent corporate progress. With me today is Rob Weisskopf, our CFO, as well as Jim Carr, our Chief Clinical Development Officer, and Brian Blakey, our Chief Commercial Officer, in addition to Henry, and all of us will be available for question and answers. I want to premise today's call by saying we're all working virtually, as I assume you are all as well. I hope everyone is faring well during these challenging times. Obviously very challenging for some of the patient populations that we service as well. We are off to a strong start in 2020 with a clear focus on advancing elamiprotide towards potential approval in Barth syndrome, an ultra-rare genetic condition characterized by cardiac abnormalities often leading to heart failure, muscle weakness, recurrent infections, delayed growth, and reduced life expectancy as a result of mitochondrial dysfunction. We presented very strong data from our ongoing open-label extension study early in the first quarter of last year at the American Society of Human Genetics 2019 annual meeting. That data demonstrated that treatment with elamiprotide resulted in a significant increase in average cardiac stroke volume. And more recently, we announced additional cardiac data at the American College of Cardiology 2020 virtual meeting, demonstrating significant improvements in left ventricular and diastolic and end-systolic volumes, as well as trends in other cardiac parameters. We also recently announced results from our SPIVA-001 natural history comparative control efficacy study in Barth patients, demonstrating a greater than 80-meter improvement in the primary endpoint of 6-minute walk test at 1 year compared to natural history controls with a p-value of 0.0005, as well as significant improvements in secondary endpoints of muscle strength, 5 times sit to stand, and a multi-domain responder index. In early March, we announced that the FDA had granted us rare pediatric disease designation for Barth, for which we may be entitled to a rare pediatric voucher should we receive approval in conjunction with an expedited review. More recently, we met with the FDA to discuss the natural history comparative control efficacy study and the TAS-POWER open-label extension, cardiac surrogate endpoint, and functional endpoint data. Our meeting was productive and informative relative to our regulatory path forward, and we look forward to providing further details once we've received the meeting minutes. We are actively exploring pipeline expansion opportunities in other rare metabolic cardiomyopathies. These include Duchenne and Becker's muscular dystrophies, Friedreich's ataxia, all of which entail heart failure as the leading cause of premature death. We've met with leading advocacy groups, and we plan to convene a cardiology advisory board to assess endpoints and trial design. We hope to meet with FDA to discuss this initiative toward the end of this year. Moving on to our ophthalmic pipeline. We continue to enroll patients for our Phase 2b clinical trial, which is RECLAIM-2b, which is evaluating the effect of elamiprotide in patients with dry AMD with geographic atrophy. And we have fast-track status on that program from the FDA. The primary endpoint of the trial is agreed with the FDA as low luminance visual acuity, which is low light or night vision, particularly compromised in patients with geographic atrophy. We're also evaluating secondary endpoints, including other visual function endpoints, the rate of progression of GA by optical coherence tomography and fundus autofluorescence technology, as well as visual function and quality of life questionnaires. Since our AMD trial is primarily being conducted in an elderly patient population, we are experiencing some enrollment delay as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are currently over 2/3 enrolled and we had anticipated completing enrollment during the first half of this year. In light of the impact of physical distancing restrictions on clinics and patients, to be conservative, we're adjusting our estimate of enrollment completion to the second half of this year. We will continue to monitor the situation closely, and we will make any necessary updates should this change in a meaningful way. We submitted our phase 3 protocol for elamiprotide in Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy at the end of 2019, and we look forward to receiving comments from the FDA on that protocol. Consistent with prior guidance, we do not intend to initiate this protocol until 2021 due to financing constraints. In January, we advanced our next-generation product candidate, SBT272, which has improved CNS penetration and is being evaluated for the treatment of ALS and rare neurodegenerative diseases, into a phase 1 trial to evaluate safety and tolerability, pharmacokinetics, and appropriate dose range. The phase 1 trial is a double-blind, placebo-controlled single ascending dose study enrolling up to 40 healthy subjects across multiple cohorts. SBT272 is being administered orally in this study. We still expect multiple preclinical data readouts this year for SBT272 in ALS, as well as multiple system atrophy, and for our third product candidate, SBT259 in Charcot-Marie-Tooth. We are also progressing a novel series of small molecule compounds targeting the ferroptosis pathway of cell death, which is implicated in many neurodegenerative diseases, including Friedreich's ataxia and Parkinson's. We are proud of our team for rallying following our fourth quarter setback, with MMPower 3 in primary mitochondrial myopathy falling short of its primary endpoints. We are extremely confident in the promise of our current pipeline and our ongoing programs. We expect a catalyst-rich year for the company. We look forward to keeping investors apprised of our virtual progress, and we hope that it won't be quite such a virtual earnings call going into next quarter, although obviously that's an evolving situation. With that, I'd like to turn the call over to our CFO, Rob Weisskopf, to review the financial results for the year. Rob?
Thanks, Reenie, and thank you all for joining us today. In 2019, we recognized $21.1 million in revenue associated with the Alexion arrangement entered into in October 2019. The revenue represents the portion of the non-refundable upfront payments that were recognized in full upon delivery of the top-line data for our PMM trial. Alexion has since terminated the arrangement, and as such, no additional revenue will be recognized. Research and development expenses were $44.6 million for the year ended December 31st, 2019, down from $53.1 million for the year ended December 31st, 2018. This decrease was primarily from a net decrease of $8.5 million in clinical trial costs due to the timing of the trials that ended in 2018, a $2.8 million decrease in contract manufacturing, and a $0.9 million decrease in discovery-related expenses due to the timing of activities. These decreases were offset in part by increases of $3.6 million in employee and consultant-related expenses driven by the continued build-out of clinical, medical affairs, and regulatory functions, and $0.1 million in other costs. General and administrative expenses were $22.3 million for the year ended December 31st, 2019, compared to $22.2 million for the year ended December 31st, 2018. The increase was primarily attributable to a net $2.3 million increase in pre-commercial activities, including building market disease awareness of primary mitochondrial myopathy, a $1.8 million increase in professional services for activities attributable to operating as a public company, an increase of $3.2 million in employee-related costs, offset by a decrease of $6.7 million in costs associated with the 2018 financing efforts, and a decrease in legal IP fees of $0.5 million. Other expenses totaled $25.9 million for the year ended December 31st, 2019, compared to $21.4 million for the year ended December 31st, 2018. The increase in other expenses is primarily attributable to a $22.7 million loss on extinguishment of debt recorded with respect to the convertible debt conversion into ordinary shares in conjunction with the company's 2019 initial public offering, and $0.7 million change period over period in the fair value adjustments of the warrant liability. These increases were offset by a $3.4 million change in period over period fair value adjustments of the derivative liability associated with convertible debt, a decrease in interest expense mostly related to the convertible debt of $14.7 million, and an increase in interest income of $0.8 million. We ended the year with cash and cash equivalents of $50.8 million at December 31st, 2019, which compares to $10.9 million at December 31st, 2018. With that, I will turn the call back to Reenie.
One moment, please. We're experiencing a technical difficulty. Now reconnecting Reenie.
Thanks, guys. That was a hiccup on my end. Tried to unmute myself and I hung up instead. So before we open up for questions, I want to reiterate again how pleased we are with the progress we've made this quarter, how excited we are with the progress we're making with our pipeline of mitochondrial targeted therapeutics. There's a rich history of mitochondrial dysfunction contributing to cardiac, ophthalmic, and neurological diseases, and extensive preclinical data demonstrating the promise of LMIPROTIDE and our other pipeline compounds in these areas. We're confident that we're poised to execute on that promise. I'm happy to open up the line for any questions.
Thank you. At this time, I'll be conducting a question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. A confirmation tone will indicate your line is in the question queue. You may press star 2 if you'd like to remove your question from the queue. For participants using speaker equipment, it may be necessary to pick up your handset before pressing the star keys. Our first question comes from the line of Charles Duncan with Cantor Fitzgerald. Please proceed with your question.
Good morning, Reenie and team. Thank you for taking our questions and congratulations on recent progress with the agency. I wanted to ask you about that recent meeting, and it makes sense to me that you would wait for full minutes to be able to provide some guidance going forward. But you characterize it as productive and informative, and I guess we've talked in the past about a couple of scenarios going forward with regard to LMIPROTIDE and BARTH. And I'm wondering if you can provide any additional granularity on what you anticipate to be the most likely scenario, if we think 12 months out from now.
So it was a very productive and collaborative meeting with the FDA, Chaz, and I appreciate you for asking the question. We had a number of FDA participants, very senior participants actually in attendance. You may or may not be aware, but the Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors has now reorganized into essentially a rare disease division. So the head of that division, so the director and deputy director were both on the phone, as well as the office director. And the FDA, just have to give a shout out to the FDA. This is obviously a very challenging time for the FDA. They have a lot going on. They got us comments in advance at something like 10:30 p.m. on Thursday night, ahead of the meeting. And so part of the conversation that we had with the FDA centered really on the existing data set that we have from our existing trial and requests to provide some additional analyses. I think we've mentioned in the past that we had presented data to the FDA out to week 36 of open label extension. We have data out to week 72 of open label extension. So the FDA recognized the severity of Barth syndrome. I believe recognized the challenges that it would entail to do another trial in Barth syndrome. And so really did ask us to provide some additional analyses of the data out to week 72, which we've previously announced that data, and it remains consistent. And so we're continuing to engage with the FDA on that front, really on the basis of the existing data set. So still, hopeful about filing, an NDA in the coming months on Barth syndrome from that perspective.
That's helpful, Reenie. Do you have a pre-NDA meeting planned, or are they waiting really to kind of green light that next step should it occur after they see this additional information?
So we were waiting for this meeting prior to submitting a pre-NDA meeting request. So the pre-NDA meeting is not yet scheduled.
Okay. And then as you imagine, perhaps broader utility of allomeprotide into other, neurodevelopmental disorders such as DMD and Friedreich's, I think you mentioned a cardiology advisory board. When do you anticipate holding that, and when can we get some visibility on call it the outcome and thoughts in terms of going to the agency later this year?
That's a great question, and Jim is on the phone. We are trying to work through the virtual scheduling of that ad board. Jim, we're targeting sometime this quarter.
Yes, this quarter.
The attendee list. Go ahead, Jim.
No. I was just going to say we have the attendee list, and it's just, as Reenie mentioned, it's just working through the logistical challenges that exist. But we're hoping for this quarter.
Yeah, I understand that, Jim Reenie. Is the key question for that advisory board whether or not cardiovascular is a challenge for these patients, or can it be measured within a reasonable period of time? What is really the thing you'd like to learn in talking to them?
I'll let you take that, Jim.
Yes, of course. So our impression, our view is that the observations from Barth are applicable to other rare disease cardiomyopathies, and Friedreich's ataxia and Duchenne muscular dystrophy are certainly at the top of the list. So we want to get consensus that those findings are applicable to those patient populations. We feel that they are, but there's a lot of granularity involved. So, for example, when does one introduce allomeprotide in the setting of DMD, for example? Just knowing the progression of the cardiomyopathy that ensues for most patients. What is the most meaningful time to introduce it? What would the endpoints be, et cetera? So again, just gaining more granularity about how we would actually pursue those endeavors.
Okay, that's helpful. Last question for Rob, Rob, I guess I'm on the West Coast, so maybe the espresso hasn't kicked in yet, so I may have missed this. But did you talk about a guidance for going forward in terms of cash spend this year?
No, not at this point.
Okay, and is there a key lever that you're waiting for to come up with that?
Well, I think that if we look at our cash and equivalents of $50.8 million at December 31st, and in conjunction with the reduction in operating expenses through the corporate reorganization that we did, our funds should be sufficient to fund operations through multiple inflection points, including the Barth NDA filing in the second half of 2020, as well as enrollment and completion of dry AMD study.
Okay, that's all I need. Thanks for taking my questions.
Sure.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Christopher Marai with Nomura Instinet. Please proceed with your question.
Hey, good morning, and thank you for taking my questions. Congrats on the progress. I was wondering if first we could touch upon some of the potential data that you may be seeing for your next generation assets. You started the first in human trials of 272 in healthy subjects, and I was wondering the type of data you might expect to see from that study, and how we might be able to compare that to allomeprotide to understand the molecule's characteristics and potential applicability going forward.
Jim, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So, Chris, the ongoing phase 1 study with 272, for example, it's a traditional phase 1 first in human single ascending dose design trial. So the primary objective of those kinds of trials is, of course, safety. But PK is also a component of that. So the trial is ongoing. And again, so we expect to get an impression about safety and an impression of PK.
And then, Chris, I think hopefully then, sort of triaging that with what we're seeing in preclinical models that we're running at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was curious if you might, have any other target engagement type data, anything else in that study, just to be able to benchmark it versus elamiprotide or, other bioavailability data that could be potentially helpful to suggest that the molecule behaves differently from elamiprotide in the ways that you were hoping. So is it my understanding that won't be there? It's just sort of safety, PK, PD?
Safety, PK, PD at this point in time. Sort of moving forward, we might look to essentially get sort of CNS penetration, but not in this first study.
Okay, great. And then secondarily, I understand you've got good feedback from the FDA. How should we think about the potential in Europe for elamiprotide and BARF? Obviously, it's a relatively small population, so Europe might be something addressable also by stealth. Could you maybe walk us through your plans to address that opportunity? And then lastly, with respect to the FDA, you need to present, I guess, additional data analysis out to week 72. So beyond getting the meeting minutes, what might be the gating factor or the timeline that it takes to get that analysis to the FDA? Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Brian to speak to Europe and BARF. I'll answer your second question first and then hand it over to Brian. In terms of timelines for additional data to the FDA, we do have the week 72 analyses. We would have to, so we have them internally. This is an open label extension. So provision of those to the FDA would be a fairly rapid, undertaking for us. We would want to update our CSR with formal outputs, which requires a data cut and a little bit more of external lifting. So that timeline could take a little bit longer, but frankly, would still fall within the original timeline for data cuts to support our NDA to do those formal outputs. So the provision of top line information to the FDA can happen quite rapidly from that perspective. So we, are expecting to be able to, turn around the analyses that they've requested and get those back into them shortly. So Brian, do you want to talk about Europe and BARF?
I will do. Good morning, Chris. I hope you're having a good morning. So we have done some preliminary work in Europe. I'm talking to some of the larger countries in the Big Five, Germany, France, UK, about reimbursement for BARF. As you would expect, it is an easier road for reimbursement for BARF because of such a small population and because of the devastation of the disease. So right now we are evaluating, we're working ourselves at being able to go ahead and promote it into Europe versus we're in very early discussions with some strategics to kind of do an analysis of which is better for us to do it or to be able to hand it off. So I think we'll be evaluating that over the next couple of quarters to see where we land and then move forward with that decision.
Okay, great. And then in Europe, just with respect to promoting the product, is it possible to leverage other potential, compassionate access use pathways there to get drug to patient without going through the formal approval process? I know some companies have previously done that without, and these processes enabled them to market the drug without a formal approval. And actually commercialize it. So is that how the company looks to bring the drug to patients in the Europe region going forward?
I mentioned, Chris, that's one of the options we're definitely evaluating is through the compassionate use or expanded access programs to be able to get patients access to the drug and then convert them over and also start the reimbursement process. So one of the areas that we are evaluating along with the strategics and then just a general promotion, what that would cost us to be able to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Matthew Lucchini with BMO. Please proceed with your question.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the questions. So I guess first, it sounds like, what you're saying is the company is, I want to come back to the question of cash. It sounds like what you're saying is the company is funded until, the end of the year, essentially, even with expense reductions in place. And so just wanted to, maybe have you guys talk a little bit about how you're thinking about options to address cash needs beyond that point. I mean, you've highlighted a pediatric voucher. Maybe talk a little bit about what else you're considering, if it's business development of some sort. And then, I guess more broadly, how we should be thinking about, the relative prioritization of some of the different projects that are going on, BART versus dry AMD versus some of these early programs, especially given, say, that with the delay in AMD data now being pushed, presumably to no earlier than, let's say, mid-21 at the earliest. So just, help us think through how you guys are thinking about the company's evolution as we move from the end of the year, as you've got these, sort of important data points to keeping things moving as we move into 21. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Matt. So in terms of how we're thinking about addressing cash needs going forward, that's obviously, something that's dynamic and ongoing. We look at all options and explore all options. We do think that the potential of a pediatric voucher in BART is material for us, could, potentially, fund us through BART launch and potentially, some additional indications, expansion opportunities. So that is fairly material, but we would be expecting to see that potentially coming, earliest would probably be Q1 of next year. So in terms of, other opportunities, business development, discussions remain ongoing. There is certainly some interest, particularly in the ophthalmic programs on the BD side. In terms of prioritization of projects, I think that, BART really does remain our priority focus, but it's, primarily regulatory spend at this point, right? So open label extension remains ongoing, but from a resource allocation perspective, those are mostly regulatory efforts that we're doing the lifting on right now and the related clinical support. AMD, we are evaluating the data in AMD, looking to really understand the impact of the recruitment slowdown. I think we're going to have better insight into that coming out of next quarter, because we'll hopefully understand the full scope of it. We did have the potential to do interim analyses of the AMD data. If you recall, in phase 1, we saw statistically significant improvements from baseline in visual function at 6 months, for example. So, potential there to do a data cut earlier at 6 or 9 months in versus 12. So those are all things that we have under consideration as we look going forward. The preclinical work we think is important and is not taking significant resources. It's a lot cheaper to do mouse studies than it is to do human studies. So we do think it's important to keep moving our pipeline forward. And again, there is some partnering and BD interest around that as well.
Okay, thank you. And I guess maybe in the context of the BART NDA, can you just remind us, are there any remaining, either tox work that needs to be done or other preclinical activities? Basically, what I'm thinking about is, anything where there's animal work that requires regular human interaction such that is, challenged in terms of people even being able to get into the lab today.
No.
Is there anything like that for BART?
No, there is not. In fact, DNP, so we've had a long regulatory history with BART, as you may recall. When we met with DNP last spring on the BART program, they had signed off on our preclinical package. non-clinical
Okay, great.
package.
Thank you.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you for taking the questions.
Yep, no.
Thank you. Our next question comes from line of Yi Chen with H.C. Wainwright. Please proceed with your question.
Thank you for taking my question. Given the current situation of the coronavirus, when do you think the pre-NDA meeting is likely to occur, and how soon can the company submit the NDA for Barth syndrome after the meeting?
Thanks, Chen. So I think we're going to have to. That question probably depends more on FDA than on us. But based on the interaction we've just had, while it was a little awkward to do by phone with the FDA was extremely responsive, as I mentioned, kind of staying up until 10:30 at night to get us comments well ahead of this meeting on Thursday, which is well ahead from FDA perspective. And then, holding the virtual meeting, which was very productive with a lot of FDA members in attendance. So it seems, from our limited viewpoint of the world, the FDA is doing everything they can to keep business moving. They reiterated several times on our call that they are keenly aware that patients are waiting, that it's a severe and devastating disease. And that, we got a true sense of partnership and collaboration from the FDA. So with that, I think, possible to have a pre-NDA meeting in the second quarter. Again, I can't speak for FDA, but we still think that's a possibility, which would still keep us on track for NDA submission, in the second half of this year, which was our original timeline.
Okay. Second question, could you verify that the phase 3 protocol for LHON has already been finalized with FDA input, and it's just that you are not starting the trial until 2021?
We submitted that protocol in December to the FDA, and we have not received feedback from the FDA on it yet.
Okay.
So we would like to receive that feedback. We did align with FDA on what endpoints we could look at in that protocol when we met with them last spring. So we do feel that we have high level alignment with the FDA on endpoints, but we certainly welcome their feedback on other aspects of trial design. And this time, before we initiate the trial, we think will enable us, the time to get that feedback. It's always better to have it going into the trial.
Got it. Lastly, could you update us on the topical ocular formulation of enalaprotide? Is it already being developed?
So we had used a topical ophthalmic formulation in the LHON phase 2 study that we did. That was with eye drops. Our plan for phase 3 was to move to sub-Q because we think there's higher concentrations in the retina. What we are looking at doing, and this work is currently in progress, is developing an IVT formulation of enalaprotide.
So this ocular formulation is the same formulation that's going to be used in the future dry AMD trials after phase 2B?
After phase 2B, we are exploring the potential of using an IVT formulation for AMD.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, if you'd like to join the question queue, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Our next question comes from the line of Maury Raycroft with Jefferies. Please proceed with your question.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for taking my questions. I just had a few quick clarification questions. First one is for 272 for the initial phase 1 clinical data. Is that still expected 2Q? And I was just wondering if that phase 1 with clinical sites is posted online anywhere.
So that is being conducted in the UK, and so I do not believe it is posted online anywhere. And in terms of timing of that data, I don't think Jim is on the line any longer because he had another call at 9. So we may face some small delays because of COVID, sort of in the subsequent cohorts of that. So I would say, Q2 into Q3. It doesn't impact any of our timelines in terms of what we were thinking about initiating other studies because the preclinical data that we need to support those won't be until end of year.
Right. Okay. And then For the mid-year guidance for elmeprotide, will that be guidance specifically based on the minutes, or will it be based on FDA's feedback on the requested 72-week analysis too? And do you view this more as an update over the summer, or could it be a fall update?
I would hope to be providing an update over the summer, and I think to answer your question, we've literally just met with the FDA yesterday, so I think we need a little bit more time as a team to, give guidance in terms of, when we'll be submitting our next meeting request and just how we expect that back and forth to go. We'll also have to see, again, FDA is constrained, although very impressively responding to us to date. So we'll have to see how that plays out over the next few weeks. But, we would hope to provide, an update both on sort of minutes and hopefully, subsequent interactions. And we would hope that to be early summer timeframe.
Okay, so it could include some feedback on the 72-week analysis as well.
Yes, it could.
It depends on the FDA. Okay.
Yeah, I just don't want to speak for them because these are kind of unprecedented times. So I can't really rely on typical timelines from their perspective. But everything we've seen suggests that they are, very responsive to us and very collaborative. And so we, are optimistic that we'll be, business as usual from their perspective. That's certainly what they've demonstrated thus far.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for taking my questions.
Yep. Thanks, Maury.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our question and answer session. I'll turn the floor back to Ms. McCarthy for any final comments.
So appreciate everybody for hopping on the phone today. Appreciate the questions, and, hope everyone is doing well in these challenging times. Stay safe out there, and we're, again, very optimistic about the milestones that we have coming forward. The team is continuing to make progress, and we, remain confident that we can deliver on our goals for this year. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. This concludes today's teleconference. You may disconnect your lines at this time. Thank you for your participation.